just to continue on the same vein, and they've gotten it to, somebody said 161 to somewhere a while ago.
I believe the applicant testified that the proposal as submitted is at 161. To the engineer to the center radius point from the curb line on 3rd. The applicant's engineer indicated they could reduce it to 150, but I think the applicant indicated it was his desire to leave it at the 161, if I understood the testimony correctly.
So they can, you believe they can reduce it to 150, but they don't want to?
But you can certainly ask the applicant a clarifying question directly on that point.
If we may.
Yep. Scott or the applicant, either one can come up or both.
It can be reduced to 151 is my understanding. However, to do so, we're shortening that street and making the shape of the lots less than an ideal layout. Given all the alternatives, it's our desire to leave it at 161 feet because the way that the lots lay out is superior as far as just the dynamics, lot to lot, the shape of them and whatnot. We're 11 feet past what the international standard is. So essentially what it means is when a fire truck pulls in there, when he has to back up, he's going to back up 11 feet more.
And we're talking to the center of the cul-de-sac.
To the center of the radius of the cul-de-sac, that's right. So where the standard is, we're just a little bit past it. And so our preference is that you would override that and that you would say, you know what, it's close enough, let's go with it. That's our preference. If you don't go that direction, essentially what we'll have to do is shorten that street 11 feet so that it makes the lots a little less than an ideal layout.
But he asked the question.
But you won't lose a lot.
It would not lose a lot, but it would make the lots not as good as they could be. Our desire when we lay this out is to lay out the design to make the best lot layout that we can. Unfortunately, we're 11 feet past an international standard. So our preference is that you override that since it's so close and that we can keep our lot layout.
Art down there had a question.
You guys were hitting on it pretty good about exactly where we're measuring from, and to was part of the question, but I also believe that the international standards exist for a reason, and the lot layout, by being nice, is subservient to those regulations, in my opinion. But
Wayne?
Well, and that, along the lines of that, I'm concerned about the legalities of it. I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about saying, well, this time we say, well, okay, yeah, 11 feet, that's okay. The next person comes in and says, well, we're only 15 feet. Well, you see where I'm going with that. So where's the precedent become to where we start increasing the fudge factor? That being aside, I would ask the city attorney, what's our, if we are in violation of the International Fire Code, and a house catches on fire or whatever reason, are we legally responsible for something that could happen that's relevant to that problem?
I mean, it's hard to predict. I mean, I know the fire department gets audited. It may affect fire rating at some point, so everybody's, could be affected at some point. And it's not just for getting a vehicle in and happen to back up 11 feet. My understanding in fire trucks, is outside of probably my expertise, is that so they can get more equipment in there. It's the length of hose. That's basically how they measure it. And so if it's over 150 feet, I think they have some firefighting issues that may cause hardships.
Gary?
If I may, as Rod indicated before, you've adopted these codes. You've adopted the International Fire Code. That is the city's code. It's no longer an international code. It's adopted by the state of Idaho. City Council has also adopted it. If you desire to deviate from that code, then you must have a standard to go by. Merely because it's 11 extra feet is not, in my opinion, sufficient reason to grant leniency or ignore the code. If there is a design flaw, for instance, or a design issue. I know there was a subdivision up in, I think Walter may have been the developer of that subdivision at one time, but there was a street gradient. Width of the street, sidewalks, I believe, was the issue because of the topography. Council elected not to require a sidewalk on one side of a street in that development. that is a design issue that had to do with topography. In this case, it's not topography, it is merely that the applicant does not desire to comply with the code. So if the council decides that it desires to deviate from the code, then the council needs to make a reasoned decision as to why they are making that, granting that leniency.
Tom had a question. I want to grab him here instead. I'll come back to you, Walter.
Well, I just wanted to make a statement that I'd rather not see the 96-foot cul-de-sac, so I'd like to try to figure out making the 60-foot work. If that means staying with the 150, then I'm okay with that. If I'd rather not go against what the fire department is bringing forward with the 2009 International Fire Code. I'd like to see us figure out I think the parking thing is going to be a more ongoing day-to-day problem than a maybe someday fire on those 4 houses in the end of the cul-de-sac. If it's an issue of not allowing or allowing parking on a street that we might not normally allow parking on, I think it might be better to either allow that to happen or figure out some public parking that's put in the middle of that large block section. I don't have the answer for that, but...
Okay. John, I'll get to you in a second. Walter had something that'll come over to you, John.
If I may, while the applicant's at the podium, a different question for you.
Yes.
What is your proposed setback for houses in this plat? How
I'm
many
going to
feet?
defer to Scott on that. Frankly, I don't know off the top of my head.
I believe it's 20 feet.
That is 20 feet to the property line or 20 feet to the curb line?
right-of-way line to the face of the house.
Right-of-way to the face of the house.
Okay. John?
I want to move that we table this. There seems to be a lot of information that needs to go back and forth between the city departments and the developer, and a lot of questions appear to be unanswered, and there seems to be some gray area. So I move we table this for a month.
John made a motion to table it, but I have not heard a second.
I'd like to see us have a little more discussion first about any other issues revolving around this before
Okay,
we...
the motion dies then. Without a second, Dan had something he wanted to add here. Wayne, I'll come over to you.
Well, I agree with Tom that parking is something that, I'd like to see available on there, and I don't know if there's a way we can go away from is it a requirement or a recommendation on because of what that street is classified?
Les?
The City of Moscow has an adopted urban street classifications map that was adopted in 2003 by the City Council. It's approved by ITD. It's approved by FHWA. That document indicates that 3rd Street, as it passes through this property and beyond, would be considered an urban collector. The city also has adopted street standards, and in the case of urban collectors, the street standard is for a 35-foot wide street, 2 travel lanes, and 2 bicycle lanes. And obviously, there's always the option to add parking if you add width. I think the applicant is proposing to substitute parking for bicycle lanes, which brings up other issues.
Art, did you have something you wanted to add in here?
I was just going to get back to exactly that same issue, that on that very long stretch, a third of a mile about, where there is no on-street parking and no other provision for people to place their cars during visits, is going to be a mess, a really, really big mess. Previously, with the Windfall Hills plat, there were bump outs included on the south side of the street that would accommodate parking not entirely along, not continuous, but places for some cars in 8-foot wide bump outs in several locations on the south side. And that was acceptable both to City Council and to Planning and Zoning at that time. And in this plat, that dropped out. And so if some kind of provision could be obtained either by shortening the lots in some of those areas to provide some parking through there, I think we could achieve a compromise, but definitely maintaining the street up to city code for the collector street plus maintenance of the bike lanes, I think, is essential. And we have to think about what to do about the parking around that basic requirement.
Yeah, Walter?
To either Mike or Les or Bill, am I correct that the right-of-way width of this plat would allow such bump outs without having to shorten lots?
Bill? If I may, that's correct. The prior Windfall Hills plat had a 70-foot right-of-way. There was a 70-foot right-of-way in this plat as well. And the Windfall Hills plat did accommodate the on-street parking on one side.
And, if I may?
Yeah, continue. Walter.
And so it was not a continuous parking on one side, but it had...
We have a copy of the Windfall Hills plat just so you can see how it was laid out previously. So you can see the slight widening of the roadway on the south edge there with a little division between the two. So those were the expanded roadway width pockets to accommodate on-street parking on the south side of 3rd that were proposed as part of the Windfall Hills plat.
It's at least something.
Don?
Is there a rule that we have to go by that says if you've got a bike path going this way on one side of the street, you have to have one coming back this way on the other side, or can they be on the same side of the street?
Les, would you like to answer that?
I will take a try.
Stab at it?
There's not a written rule to that effect. It is, again, adopted as our street standard for an urban collector with bike lanes on either side. You would not typically build one bike lane and try to put both directions of traffic in one bike lane. Obviously, you're only talking 5 to 6 feet width. You're opposing traffic just within the bike lane. The bikes are going to be opposing. That doesn't work. Also, you don't want them going the opposite direction of vehicular traffic and traveling that way. If you only had bike lane on one side, and it does happen, typically you would then, in some fashion, mark the other direction with maybe a sharrow or some other technique to put bikes in the travel lane with the vehicles.
Wayne?
Les, how wide is 3rd Street between Hayes and Adams?
30 feet.
Say again?
30 feet.
30.
30.
And it has parking on one side, but no bicycle lanes.
That is correct.
Okay, I'll make a statement for how I'm feeling right now on this, guys. I don't like a 35-foot wide street with bike lanes on both sides, no parking. It becomes a major thoroughfare. It's going to be hard to keep traffic down. There's no traffic calming involved in it. I think it will be a danger. This is basically a residential neighborhood. It won't even see the traffic that 3rd Street has between Hayes and Adams. It won't even see close to the traffic that has. I would prefer to see one bicycle lane on one side and parking on the other side. That is something that the council can do, because there is that type of, and I know Les doesn't like what I'm saying, but we do have the ability to make those kind of changes. I think that would give some traffic calming. The other concern that I have, too, is once this subdivision is complete, they need to sell these lots, and these lots have to be attractive to the people that want to buy them. And if you come and you want to buy a lot, and it's like, well, I see I've got parking for 2 cars in my driveway. What about if neighbors come? Well, no, there's no parking on the street. Well, sorry, I don't want to buy the lot then. I'm going to go buy one somewhere else. It doesn't make the lot as attractive. So I will push for parking on one side and a bicycle lane on the other side.
Dan?
I think if you only have a bicycle lane on one side, you just will not have them at all. I say you have parking on both sides, and I think that this is a good place to start with the sharrows. You know, I don't think we have them anywhere in town right now, but this might be the the place to put them to give us that, that idea. I mean, a bicycle is a vehicle, last I checked. Am I right, Tom? Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a good place to start it, and as Wayne said, if you've got cars parked down there, that is a traffic calming device. We're coming up on the new map, and perhaps, it's maybe time to make a change. This is something that we didn't have, that we thought this might be what we would want it to be. Maybe something we make something else. And then if I could, I just think back to, I'll put on another hat and fighting a fire in a 60-foot cul-de-sac with 3 trucks in there and a lot of hose laying out, and we weren't even 150 feet in, and it can be a little bit treacherous. I mean, I don't want to wish a fire upon anybody like that to worry about, but I just as soon see a 96-footer, and I don't know if anything up there shows what that would look like, but I also see a lot of 60-footers in the other neighborhoods, and I know of only one off the top of my head in the last few years that we've been in, and it was pretty sketchy to get in there with that, and then you got to get the trucks in and out, and that's not fun either. So, if we can do something, I say we follow the fire code one way or the other, whether it be the 96-foot cul-de-sac or whether it be at the 150-foot line.
Last, you had something you wanted to...
If I may, just as a follow-up, I guess a couple things. First off, the city of Moscow has been really putting a lot of effort over the years into becoming a bicycle-friendly community. And that's part of why the standards that we have in place include bicycle lanes. It's still the preferred way to establish a bike route on a street that would be collector status or above. Okay. In terms of whether or not there should be a collector street, I think you mentioned the intent, as was originally laid out probably back into the 90s, was that this street will eventually swing its way around to the north and actually go all the way up to Mountain View. That's a fairly lengthy section of road that will serve a lot of land and a lot of potential future subdivisions. So there will be a fair bit of traffic funneling down through this area. We need to keep that in mind. Will it match what we see on 3rd Street today, by East City Park? Maybe eventually. Okay? Probably not at first, certainly, but in time. And we need to think about that longer term. It's not just the next 5-10 years. It's going to be 30-40 years out as well. If you do choose to deviate from the adopted street standard for the urban collector, talking about putting parking on both sides or a bike lane on one side or the other, my recommendation to you would be, if you're going to do bike lane on one side and parking on the other, you do at least a 37-foot section. It's an 8-foot parking, 2 12-foot bike or vehicular lanes, and a 5-foot bike lane. You need those 12-foot lanes just for shy distance off of parked cars and to accommodate bikes and vehicles together. So that's 37. If you were to go with parking on both sides, I would recommend a 40-foot section, because now you got 2 8-foot parking strips and 2 12-foot lanes. That's 40 feet.
But just quickly then, what's the width on the other side of the creek there from Cleveland up to Grant, roughly? Or
when you start at Hayes and you work your way east past the apartments, it's 30 feet still. About half a block
Wayne, it gets a little bigger.
Goes to 40, and then from there on to the creek and actually all the way to Mountain View is 44.
Oh, it's 44. Okay.
Yeah, so it's actually a larger section, and there's parking on both sides of the roadway.